Hi Booktube, and welcome to a new video. This is a Friday Reads, which is really a Friday Reads for 2 weeks because I didn't post a video last week. And I'm going to talk about 4 books. Thompson, The Killer Inside Me. Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. The Train Was on Time by Heinrich Boll. And The Seventh Cross by Anna Segers. And just to say that 3 of these were recommended by other booktubers. The Seventh Cross by Shaw the Book Maniac, as was The Train Was on Time. Love and Other Thought Experiments was recommended by Eric Carl Anderson over at Lonesome Reader. And The Killer Inside Me was sent to me by Mitchell Axler in that surprise box I received. And I'll post links to the Booktubers and to my unboxing, because I think there are about 17 books in there, and I've read about 5 or 6 of them now, and not a dud yet. Okay, so I'm going to start with the 2 Second World War ones. And the reason I'm going to talk about those is because I'm going to talk about them in contrast to this book, A Meal in Winter, which I reviewed in my last Friday Reads, which was sent to me by the Big Green Bookshop as part of their annual subscription, where they send you a surprise title. So 3 books on the Second World War, which is about as far back as I'm prepared to go with historical fiction. And the difference is that I enjoyed these 2 very much. I gave them both, well, I gave that 4 and that 4.5. That's not really spoilers, I will talk about them in more detail. And I gave that 2 or 2.5. And the difference is jeopardy, because, you know, all 3 are set amongst the Nazis, and there are potential victims that they are in pursuit of. But one really has to feel the jeopardy for the victim that they're pursuing. Otherwise it doesn't work. And the problem with this is that, you know, they are sent out to fight, to round up Jews who've hidden out in the forest in Poland, and they find one, but the bulk of the book is them on the way back, and they sort of go into this Polish abandoned hovel and they cook up a meal, and the bulk of that is about how difficult it is, given, you know, it's the depth of winter and they've got no firewood, got nothing to, no cutlery, no saucepans, all that sort of stuff. And there's no jeopardy in it. You know, I couldn't see what the point of it is. The Jew was almost like wallpaper. You know, they stuck him in a storage cupboard while they got with the meal, cooking the meal. It was very bizarre. Anyway, completely different. There's lots and lots of jeopardy in both of these 2. So, The Train Was on Time by Heinrich Boll, which is the 3rd of my Read More German Literature in 2020. Segers being 4th. And this, basically a German soldier has been on leave and is returning to the front, and he has this premonition as he boards the train that he's going to die on that journey, somewhere on the journey between Germany and Poland. And it has that's the urgency and the jeopardy that drives this. It very much reminded me of Matthias Enard's Zone, that there's a real rhythm of the train driving this story, driving the narrative, and it's really effective. And it only goes slightly off the rails, excuse the pun, towards the end when they are changing trains at the outpost of Lvov in Poland, and they have time to kill. And the 2 soldiers that he's hooked up with, one of them's really well plugged into Lvov, and he takes them to this brothel. And we get a long scene in the brothel with a prostitute, but they're not having sex, they're sort of having anything but sex. They're having 2 human beings trying to reach out and touch each other, and, you know, emotionally and spiritually. It's all a bit odd, it's all a bit overblown, and we lose the rhythm because he's no longer on the train, interestingly. But it was a really good read up to that point, I felt, which is why I gave it 4.5. You know, there was a real sort of suspense, you know, and some really good sort of contemplation on, you know, when you know life is imminently finite, and it, you know, it drives a certain urgency of looking back on your life and, you know, what you're about to give up, and what, you know, chances that you've missed. And it's well written. I would say the translation is by who was the translation by? Leila Venowitz. And just to give you this was an idea I'd never really thought of before. So he's in the brothel. They send her to a room, and 250 marks are paid for her because she is the opera singer, i.e. quite a highly educated, artistic prostitute. A very valuable little doll, and she has to go to that room like a soldier going to the front. She has to go, even though she is the opera singer, a very valuable little doll. A terrible life. They send her to a room and she has no idea who is inside. An old man, a young one, an ugly man or a handsome one, bestial or innocent. She has no idea and goes to the room. And now there she is, frightened, just frightened, too frightened to hear what he is saying. It is truly a sin to go to a brothel, he thought. I like the association he makes with they send her to a room, or she has to go to a room just like a soldier has to go to the front. She's obeying orders, through force. So I thought that was a really good read. And then The Seventh Cross by Anna Segers. So this takes place in Nazi Germany in 1934, a year after Hitler has come to power, and before Jews were sort of herded into ghettos. This is really the time when they were just starting to strip them of their rights as equal citizens. So it's not about Jews under the Nazis, it's about Germans, all Germans under the Nazis. And the concentration camp here, called Westerhoven, is full of political enemies that the Nazis have rounded up, mainly communists and Marxists. And there's a breakout. 7 guys have broken out, 6 are quickly recaptured. That is not much of a spoiler. And we follow through the eyes of the 7th. Is he going to make it? Is he going to get out of the country? Is he going to elude his pursuers? But we also get, and this makes it a slightly long-winded read really, we also get a whole cast of characters in the locality, some of whom he knew before he was arrested, some of whom he doesn't, some of whom are Nazis and brown shirts who are on his tail. So to get an idea of what, who were the people of Nazi Germany, the ordinary people, and what compromises and bargains did they make with themselves in order to stay safe. And a lot of that, you realise, is economic bargains, in that, a lot of them have been unemployed and all that sort of hyperinflation, stagflation that had wrecked Germany in the late 20s in the Great Depression. A lot of these people were desperate for work, or desperate for some sort of status, or saw a chance to raise their status within the local community by joining the Nazis and being given a position of power. So it was quite interesting on that, but there was an awful lot of stuff where you're following the guy on the escape, on the lam, and you're sort of heart's palpitating along with his, because it's a really good piece of writing of suspense. Is he going to make it? Is he going to get caught? And then suddenly you're whipped into a sort of a meditation from a shepherd, which is not very engaging and not very interesting. So it was a bit of a mixed bag, this, I have to say. But what I found really interesting was the guy on the lam. He knows the area quite well, but it's also become very alien to him because the Nazis have literally changed the landscape of the people who populate it. In that, who can you trust? Who can you talk to? Who can you try and, engage to give you help? And who guys in uniform are on the look. Obviously, he has to avoid them. And it's very interesting because, the only safety he's going to have is if he gets out of the country, if he manages to flee into Holland. But quite clearly, he's utterly devoted to his homeland of Germany in terms of its spiritual and, its geography, and it's what he's grown up with. And that tension is at play the whole time. And right towards the end, it looks like he's got a really good chance of making it. I'm not going to spoil it, whether he's successful or not. But he's waiting for potentially the final bit of transport to get him over the border. He's just killing time. And he starts flirting with the waitress, and that's a sort of reversion to how he was before he was arrested, because he was a womanizer. He left his wife and child to go and hook up with another woman. So he's not a nice guy. And he starts flirting with this woman, He's been reduced to, in the camp, like all of them, he's been reduced to the level of an animal by their treatment. And when he's outside, he's also sort of reduced to the level of an animal, not only because he's so beaten and sort of starving and had sort of broken bones and stuff, and he's got a bad cut from the barbed wire as he escaped, but he's an animal because in that sense of his only instinct is to sense danger from predators all around him. In this case, of course, people in Nazis and SA and sympathetic citizens to the SA. So he's very much living off his wits, living on instinct. And it's only when he sort of, chills in this tavern and starts flirting with this woman that he's finally beginning to re-inhabit his own flesh. But in doing that, again, it's this thing of wanting, I got the sense he wants to stay in Germany, that his heart and his soul are in Germany, and yet he knows the only way he's going to survive in the Germany as it's currently constituted in 1934 is to leave it, is to flee it. And I thought that was really well done, that sort of contradiction within him. And the only other thing I wanted to say is there were times when this was a bit stodgy to get through and a bit of a slog. As I say, mainly when you weren't following the guy on the lam. But a lot of the chapters start really, really well. So Overkamp, who's the guy in charge of the interrogations in the camp, Overkamp closed his door so he could have a few minutes alone before interrogating Wallau. He straightened out his papers, looked through a few notes and statements, sorted them, underlined and connected items using his own special system of lines. His interrogations were famous. Overkamp could elicit useful information from a corpse, according to Fleischer. His outlines for interrogations could be compared only to musical scores. That's just chilling writing. This is the banality of evil, the guy sort of making this sort of flowchart of not only the connections between people in order to track down the guy who's escaped, but a flowchart of questions in order to sort of break down the person that he's interrogating. And it's compared with a musical score. We know that some of the Nazis were, great sort of fans of classical music and things like this, that sort of contradiction. Brilliant. So there was some brilliant writing in here, but as a whole, it was just a bit too stodgy in places, so I gave this 4 stars. Okay, on to The Killer Inside Me, which is 1950s by Jim Thompson, set in Texas. Even though it's sort of categorised as noir, one associates noir with sort of, big city, New York, Chicago, that sort of sense of corruption and dark side and ruin. This is set in Texas, in a small town in Texas. So it is definitely noirish. So to give you an example of the style there, of, how I say this is he's just beaten up a woman and he goes, "I wiped my gloves on her body. It was her blood and it belonged there." Chilling. This is very, very dark. This is a deputy sheriff in Texas who has managed to keep down, his mental illness, his sort of psychopathy, for many years, but it's about to burst out in here, and he's sort of cleaning house, tidying up all loose ends. And it's really good. It's really well plotted. It's taut. It's tense. Twists and turns all the time. It's very much, people who are fans of Dexter, the psychopath, the serial killer, but who uses his skills for good, I think would appreciate this. Although this guy isn't as much on the side of good as Dexter is, but a really good read, and I gave this 4 stars. And finally, To Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. And this is 5 stars. This will, I've got a fair chance of being in my top 10 reads of the year. And it does what it says in the title. Every chapter in this starts off with a thought experiment. So you get things like Pascal's wager. What else do you get? You get The Prisoner's Dilemma, which is something I've used in my own writing. You get Thomas Nagel's thought experiment on, whether one can project oneself into the consciousness of a non-human, such as an animal. In this case, in Nargle's case, it was a bat. Then we get something called philosophical zombies, etc., etc. So each chapter is prefaced with The Chinese Room by John Searle, about things about human consciousness. What is human consciousness? How do you define it? What is it made up of? So that starts each chapter, almost like a sort of an elongated epigram. But then what we get is a series of interlocked, they're not standalone short stories, they're definitely, the same characters populate them. So I would call this a novel rather than short stories, but they are on very, very different realities. So they're not parallel histories or parallel universes, they're more parallel consciousnesses for the same people, but with different consciousnesses, because this book is an exploration of how we see ourselves, how we see reality and things like that. And it all builds from a fantastic first chapter where a lesbian couple, very different, one is a scientist, Eliza, and the other is much more sort of homely, called Rachel. And Rachel's been trying to get Eliza to commit to, having a child. And Eliza has sort of held out against it. But there's that sort of battle going on under the surface. And they're in bed together one night, about to go off to sleep, or they are asleep. But Rachel has this sensation in her eye where she's been bitten by an ant, and she feels that the ant has then proceeded, as she's sort of startled awake, that some shock motion has sort of thrust the ant inside the jelly of her eye, and the ant is now inside her eye. Eliza, the scientist, is going, no, this is nonsense, etc., etc. And this is the crux of the relationship. Eliza doesn't believe for one moment, but for the sake of showing trust and faith in your partner and believing in them and love, she says to her, it's possible. Maybe I believe you. And at the same time, in doing that, she realises that she's got to go all in, that she's been holding back. And now that she's made this sort of leap of faith against her own belief, she commits to them having a child by artificial insemination. So that night is the making of this relationship, seemingly. And they have the child. Unfortunately, Rachel develops cancer. She has a tumour and dies, within quite a short space of time. So it's a very touching, beautifully written chapter about which partner is going to give ground to the other in order to demonstrate faith and trust and belief in them. And I just thought it was brilliantly done. That's the first chapter. Then we get the only two that are slightly unsatisfactory, I think. One is on Rachel's mother, who's sort of retired with her artist husband to Brazil. And the other one is of a boy in Cyprus, just before it got divided between Turkey and Greece, who turns out he will have a relationship with Rachel. I say a relationship, I don't mean have sex with her. I mean, he has a connection to Rachel. But I didn't really see that they fed that much into the book. It's really in chapter 4 that the book really takes off for me, because we get a chapter which was the thought experiment was, can a human mind imagine what it's like to be in an alien consciousness, that of an animal, and equally, can an animal imagine what it's like to be inside a human being? Questions about the nature of consciousness and solipsism and all that sort of stuff, being aware of others. And it's told from the point of view of the ant, as if the ant really does exist, did enter her eye, and it was attracted to her by the sweetness of the tumour. Before they knew about the tumour, but the ant could smell the sweetness of the necrosis or whatever. And that's what drew the ant into the eye. And he nibbles at that tumour, that's his sustenance. And in doing so, he is fusing, in his imagination, or in his conception, he is fusing with Rachel, because of course the tumour is lying on her brain. And gradually he is becoming aware of what it is to be human through all this input that he's getting from Rachel. And it's a really, again, on the one hand it's going, well, this anthropomorphism at its worst. This is an animal told in human, portrayed very much in human terms, but because it's had the setup of the thought experiment, no, actually it works. It does work on that level. And all the subsequent chapters that afterwards are about trying to penetrate the consciousness of the various characters. So, for example, the child they had by artificial insemination grows up, becomes an astronaut, and we get a chapter on him on a mission. Something weird happens. He thinks he's arrived, but actually on the moon of Mars, I think it's Mars, that he was supposed to do and spend 2 years on a mission there. But no, he's actually ended up back at the space on Earth where he took off from. And his masters, his bosses, are trying to penetrate what's gone on there. And gradually you see the role of artificial intelligence that was controlling the mission, because it's a solo mission just between him and his AI, which is called Zeus. And then we get the consciousness of machines. How does that relate to, we create these machines, we program them. Surely they can only know what the knowledge we impart them with, or no, they can develop their own learning and understanding, which takes them away from being, sort of sub-clones of us humans. So this book works on 2 levels equally brilliantly. One, it is about a relationship or a set of relationships, questioning what love is, commitment, faith, trust. And it is also about what is the nature of consciousness, because you kind of need to know what it is to be human, what consciousness is, what are the limits of consciousness, in order to be able to give yourself to a second person, to another consciousness, which is what love is. And this book is so good at exploring that. I can't recommend this highly enough. It is an intellectual read, but also a fine piece of literary writing. There are lots of different genres on display in this book. Obviously there's science fiction stuff, and there's AI, computer consciousness, and yet you've got the very tender bookending chapters, for the first and the last, of the relationship of love. You've got the love of the mother for the child. So, as I say, I can't recommend this highly enough. Go read it. Okay, so till next time, thanks very much.